Today, the federal government of Nigeria is doing everything possible to ensure that I'm not a candidate to this election. But I'll tell you, they won't win.
Tinubu's panic mood is entering alarming stage because his desperation to make sure that Peter Obi is not on the ballot is everywhere. And the kangaroo court judgment has a better explanation. I am not a legal luminary, but one will explain to you about what actually transpired in a clear, simple terms. I want you to listen to this guy because he made a very simple explanation to all this.
The news broke today that the Federal High Court, sitting in Lokoja in Kogi State, has set aside the order which the court made in December 2025. Remember, that order was made by the court, this same court, asking INEC to register and recognize NDC as a political party. Today, the 26th day of June 2026, right? That is about 6 months after. This court, Federal High Court Lokoja, has set aside that order, which was in a full judgment of the court. In this video, we look at the verdict of today, the verdict of this court today. We ask if the same court can set aside its duly considered final judgment in the eyes of the law. We also ask, what can NDC do at this point? Let's look at the background. On 10th December 2025, Honorable Justice Issa Dashin of the Federal High Court, sitting in where? Sitting in Lokoja, delivered a full judgment, final judgment, in favor of NDC. It was reported everywhere. Sirake Dixon, the former governor of Bayelsa State, the guy patapata of NDC, the national leader of NDC, he spoke about it in glowing terms, appreciated the court for its intervention. So that court ordered INEC in that judgment to register NDC as a political party, having met the requirements of the law. The court was even angry with INEC. He said, well, these people have met the requirement of the law, and you are still dragging in registering them. I hereby make an order that NDC should be registered forthwith as a political party. INEC obeyed the order immediately. It was under the administration of Professor Joash Amukbeton that order was made. The order was obeyed immediately by INEC, and NDC was recognized as a political party. If you look at the website of of INEC, you see NDC court order. They obeyed that court order immediately. INEC published it on its website, and NDC began to exercise the rights of a registered political party in Nigeria. It sold forms, it screened candidates, it conducted primaries, okay? And then, just the same thing that the other political parties were doing in Nigeria. While awaiting to take further part in the electoral process, the same court today has delivered, the court that delivered the judgment of December 10, okay? That court has now delivered another verdict today. In today's verdict, the judge set aside its earlier judgment. The same court, the same judge, set aside its earlier judgment 6 months after the judgment was delivered. According to the judge, the earlier judgment of the court was what? Constitutionally defective. Constitutionally defective. He meant that it was delivered without hearing from all interested parties. Remember, in the matter that was before the court as of December, there were only two parties. The people that filed the matter for NDC and then INEC. Only two parties. The claimant and INEC. INEC was the only defendant. The judge is saying that the judgment was delivered without hearing from all interested parties. not the parties that were listed, but parties that were interested in the matter. The judge further ruled that the status quo should be restored to what it was before the December 2025 judgment. What was the status quo before the judgment of the court? The status quo before the judgment, before December 2025, was that NDC was not a registered political party in Nigeria. In today's ruling, the judge is saying, return to that status quo, right? That means that by today's ruling, okay, the order of the Federal High Court's Lokoja mandating INEC to recognize and register NDC as a political party, that order has been withdrawn by today's ruling. It has been withdrawn. INEC, by implication, can, by this very order of the court made today, remove NDC from its portal and stop dealing forthwith with NDC. Judgments of court, they take immediate effect. So INEC will even be right if it goes to the portal of INEC and then drags down the name of NDC, removes its logo, everything, brings it down. Why? Because the order of the court that was made against them, compelling them to recognize NDC, that order has been withdrawn by the same court today in Lokoja. Now, there are issues of law arising from these judgments. Now, there are many issues of law. Can a trial court set aside its judgment? This is a question that lots of people are asking. Can a trial court set aside its judgment? Let's look at the answer. Where a judge delivers judgment, and in this case, a final judgment, the judge becomes functus officio. Functus officio is Latin, which means his job on that matter is done. He's done. It's like Pontius Pilate. He washes off his hands. Once he delivers judgment, the judge is done. He is functus officio in law. He doesn't have reason to go back to that case. The files are closed. What happens there is that judge he has completed his job on that matter. He doesn't come back again to it. That is the law, right? If a party is dissatisfied with the judgment of the court, what he is expected to do is for him to go to the Court of Appeal and appeal against the judgment of the trial court. So, generally speaking, a judge has no right to revisit and set aside its judgment once delivered. As a matter of fact, for those of us that are in practice, once judgment is delivered, what you see is that any attempt to go back to the trial court, for the trial court to set aside the judgment, in fact, even the appellate court, for them to set aside their judgment, it is usually visited with serious resistance. Now, you remember that a few days ago, the Supreme Court of Nigeria awarded penalty of 50 million naira against a lawyer. Why? Because the lawyer went to the Supreme Court and attempted to make the Supreme Court to revisit its judgment and set it aside. The Supreme Court fell on him and awarded cost of 50 million naira and said that the 50 million naira must be paid before he can practice in any court in Nigeria. That shows you the enormity. It shows you how courts resist that application. You bring application to the court for his judgment to be set aside. Courts everywhere in the country, they resist it very badly, and then they visit you with penalty for even coming to ask for the court to revisit. Why? Because the general principle of the law is that once judgment is delivered by a court, that court is functus officio. It doesn't go back to the matter. That's the general position of the law. However, in law, there are exceptions. We proceed. Now, in a case, Attorney General of Kwara State and Lawal, a Supreme Court case, okay, the court held, the court below was right on its stance that a court of law cannot review or overrule itself except under the slip rule to correct a typographical error which would not alter the decision. The The rule here that I'm referring to, the slip rule, is maybe the judge wanted to say Attorney General of Kwara, but the judge mistakenly said Accountant General of Kwara State. Whereas every fact in the case was referring to Attorney General, not Accountant General. For that reason, somebody comes back to the court and says, my lord, this judgment is going to create confusion. You made reference to Accountant General, whereas the party that was before this court and the facts in this court reveals Attorney General. That's the slip rule. You now see that the judge made a mistake, a slip of the tongue on that. For that reason, the Supreme Court is saying that that is basically the only reason why the court will go back and correct that judgment, provided it doesn't change. You see, the court says here, which would not alter the decision. If you change from Accountant General to Attorney General, correct it from Accountant General to Attorney General, it doesn't alter the decision because all the facts reveal Attorney General. This is the decision, one of the decisions of the Supreme Court on this matter. However, in law, to every general rule, there are exceptions. Let's look at the exceptions. If the judgment is a nullity ab initio, the trial court can set aside the judgment. 2, if the judgment was obtained by fraud or deceit, the trial court can set aside the judgment. Somebody comes to say that he's a man, right? He presents himself to the court as a man, whereas he's a woman. And evidence later revealed that that person that came as a man is a woman. That was clear fraud and deceit to the court. The court has a right to set aside that judgment upon getting this evidence to show that there was deceit and fraud, right? If money was the basis, okay, corruption and something, maybe the registrar of the court was given money for the registrar to do the unthinkable in the file of the court, and the court gets to realize it. The court can set aside the judgment and say, no, this is predicated on fraud and other instances of fraud. The third reason, the third exception is if the judgment was a default judgment. Okay? Now, a writ of summons is filed against someone. He's expected to appear in court within 42 days. He doesn't appear. And hearing notice is sent to him. He doesn't still appear. The court decides to enter judgment in default of appearance. If that person, upon hearing about the judgment of the court, comes back to the court and says, my lord, I have heard about the judgment. I was not even served or something. The judge now says there was default, default judgment and so on. The court can set aside default judgment so as to give him an opportunity to defend himself, right? Now, these are the instances in law where a judgment of the court that was delivered would be set aside. These are the exceptions. 1, nullity. 2, fraud or deceit. 3, default judgment. These are the principal instances that the court would say, no, this judgment, you know what, even though it's a final judgment, I'm going to set it aside. But note this, the trial court can set aside judgment based on this, but the application must be made timeously. It must be made timeously. You can't go and sleep, wake up so many months after to approach the court to set aside. No, the court will not set it aside because you came late. Equity aids the vigilant and not the indolent, not those that sleep over their rights. Now, the judgment of today has been set aside 6 months after it was delivered. Can we say that 6 months was timeous? When did they bring the application? Can we say that the application was brought timeously? It was delivered in December and the judgment has been set aside today. Note that the law says it must be brought timeously. That is, you don't need to delay. You need to show that time has not been wasted by you, right? Okay. Once a judge delivers his judgment, the judge becomes functus officio and cannot revisit the judgment with a view to setting it aside. It's not allowed in law. It's not allowed, right? Such is not allowed in law. In practice, most courts, as a matter of policy, do not revisit their judgments. The judgment of the Federal High Court Lokoja was delivered on the 10th day of December 2025. This is June 2026. 6 months have passed. In all truth and honesty, can we say that it was done timelessly? Was the application done timelessly, immediately after the judgment was delivered? Right? Now, let's look at the implication of this ruling. The first implication is that Peter Obi, as of today, has no party to stand on for the realization of his political ambition. That's the first casualty. Peter is the first casualty of today's ruling. He has no party because under the laws of Nigeria, you cannot stand election as an independent candidate. You need a political party to stand on. It is a political party that sponsors you. So if you do not have a recognized and registered political party to stand on and exercise your rights to be voted for, that means that you cannot be voted for at an election. The logo of your political party cannot be part of the paper that is used for the voting, okay? The ballot paper, right? So Peter is the first casualty of today's ruling. I've heard the NDC say, the publicity secretary of NDC, I think they have said that they have not been deregistered, there's no order deregistering them and all of that. Go back and look at the order of the court. If the order of the court says, INEC, I hereby withdraw the authorization I had given you to register this political party, it means that the political party that was recognized by the order of the court has been withdrawn. That's the simple implication. So Peter becomes the first casualty of today's ruling. 2, the same applies to all candidates of the NDC across Nigeria. Number 3, NDC is basically no more a political party in Nigeria, going by this ruling of the court. Remember, the court having withdrawn its earlier order for recognition. Number 4, the consequences of today's ruling is high. The consequence of today's ruling is very huge against NDC when you look at it from all angles.
Well, you can go to his page and you will be able to watch the full explanation, because I just have to extract what is most important to my viewers here who are curious about what next. You see, my advice to Peter Obi and the rest of Nigerians is that, number 1, this is not Peter Obi's fight. Neither is it the NDC fight. Because what Tinubu is trying to ensure is to make sure that nobody contends with him. You remember me saying on this platform that even if Tinubu appoints Sheyi Tinubu as INEC chairman, if anything called the election happens in Nigeria in 2027, he will still lose. I'm telling you honestly. And they are seeing the handwriting on the wall everywhere. They have seen the body language of even international communities and countries of the world, that they are not going to react the way or keep mute the way they did in the previous election, the gathered kangaroo election that brought him in power. It is not going to be business as usual. They know all that. Okay? And now the next program they have on their plot or on their card is to make sure that do everything possible to stop Peter Obi from being on the ballot. In fact, for me, I will advise or suggest to him, there is no need every one of us struggling to get our PVC. There is no need spending money to bribe INEC. There is no need mobilizing the armed Nigerian security apparatus that may serve as oppressive elements against voters. There is no need for all of this drama up and down. Okay? Tinubu and INEC should just conclude and tell Nigerians the day they want to declare him as winner, not even a winner, but as unopposed. That's INEC should, Amuputa should just come and tell us on this day we are going to announce Tinubu as the sole and unopposed presidential candidate and contender of the 2027 election. Okay? And declare him returned and unopposed, so that everybody will have peace of mind. At least saved everybody the trouble of election brouhaha, because there is no point. We know that what is happening already, they have written the election result. We know that what is happening already, that they have vowed that whatever thing that may happen in the name of election, Tinubu must be returned as the president-elect or sworn in back for second term. There is no need dragging everybody into all of this drama back and forth. Because what Nigeria is experiencing is not democracy. We are just deceiving ourselves. What we are practicing is civil rule. Civil rule that is even worse than military rule. Okay? So, and also they should suspend Nigerian constitution. Because what we have seen in the court, the most disgraceful institution in Nigeria today is the judiciary. They've become the most useless institution in Nigeria today because of the way some judges are making themselves. You can imagine a judge upturning and reversing his own judgment based on what? Based on what? You had the man that gave the explanation that even the court, I think the Supreme Court, as he explained, make sure that a lawyer that filed a case attempting to, make the Supreme Court to, reverse his judgment or contradict his own self in the court was penalized with 50 million, and that he must pay that before he practice law in Nigeria again. That is to tell you how far Nigerian judiciary would have loved to protect themselves and their profession and their role in the Nigerian so-called democracy. I think I know that before the court can contradict or reverse its former judgment, at least there are number of years, at least 10 to 20 years, before, a lot of time have elapsed, situation must have changed, then they can now review previous judgment and also give a contrary judgment or opinion about it. But today, court can sit today, give a judgment, and come tomorrow and reverse the same judgment. Because what we have today is the judiciary or judgment of money for hand, back for ground. There is nothing like justice system. We only have a judgment system based on monetary incited monetary benefit. So I just want to make it clear to Nigerians that this fight is not about Peter Obi or NDC. Because by this time, if Nigerians are not yet seeing the handwriting on the wall, then we are men and women and people most miserable. And I just have to keep it that way or conclude by telling Nigerians that if they really want to save themselves, Nigeria needs a revolution, a ballot revolution. And they know that the ballot revolution is loading. That is why they are doing all this. If they succeed, if they ever succeed in removing Peter Obi from the ballot come 2027, Nigerians should put a stop on anything called election forthwith in this country. There is no need. It is not about Peter Obi, but it's about the process, because they have destroyed whatever they called democracy in Nigeria. And there is nothing like rule of law in this country. So, and it is only the people that are sovereign and they can take the, how do I put it now? Because this whole thing is becoming very, 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 that's shameful of a country. But it is only the people that can save themselves. Let me just put it that way. Nobody is coming to save you but yourselves. It is not the fight for Peter Obi, it is fight for yourselves. And it's not a fight for your Nigerian democracy, it is fight for your own future and that of your children unborn. My own role is to sensitize the people and continue in this advocacy until Nigerians wake up and say enough is enough. If they are not saying it, then there is no hope. My name is Asujono Peters, your advocate for good governance. Let me share this video. Bye-bye for now.